I'll start by telling you a few things about me. I'm 18 years old and live in northern Canada, in two different homes. One is with my father, who lives right in the middle of 222 acres of woods. We've got but a single neighbor, who is situated about a kilometer away. My second home is with my mother. She lives on the edge of a city, close to the woods and the main shopping center. The story is split into 3 parts, and believe me, it may sound crazy, but I swear, all of this is true. The first part of the story starts at my father's house. I'd often go for walks in the woods. It was peaceful and quiet. I'd always bring my 3 dogs for protection, a German Shepherd and 2 Australian Shepherds. Nothing ever happened in the woods. There was the occasional sighting of bears, and we found quite a few lynx tracks, but nothing out of the ordinary, until something started watching me from the woods. A black figure of sorts. At first, I thought it was just my paranoid mind playing tricks on me, so I shrugged it off. A few days passed since I first felt the strange watching presence. It was a cold day out. The sun was gone and the wind came from the north, making it even colder. It was around noon, and it was time for me to bring the dogs out for a walk. I brought them down to the road that leads to my house. Nobody was around and it was silent all over, except for the wind blowing through the tree leaves. I was calm, but then it felt like I was being followed. Of course, my dogs were following me, but this feeling was dark. I continued. It eventually turned back to go home. Everyone was gone, so I arrived to an empty house. As I was about to bring the dogs into their kennel, I noticed one of the Aussies was frozen in place. He was staring into the woods. I tried to get his attention, but he would not budge. I walked over to him, pat his head. He only growled, but not to me. He growled to whatever was in the woods. The dog was pacing, tail tucked between his legs and ears held back. That made me feel a little uneasy, since I've been feeling watched or followed during the walk. It also meant I wasn't the only one who felt it. I decided to be safe and locked the door when I was inside. I'd like to say this feeling left after a while, but no, it only became more frequent. I had to lock and cover my windows at night because it felt as though someone was peering through them. I told people about it, especially those I lived with. They'd tell me it was a bear or maybe some ghost. A few even mentioned that it could be a stalker. I knew it was neither of these things. It just didn't feel right. Fast forward to about 3 months after the first occurrence. It's September, and the weather has begun to get colder. I was outside with my dogs cleaning some skulls I had recently gotten from a trapper. I was just minding my own business. All of my family members were gone, so I was left alone again. Then, I went near the forest and felt the dark presence again. It was so strange. I just couldn't shake it off as nothing. Scared, I went inside and decided to make myself some food in the comfort of my home. The fear left, and I felt safe again, until I heard the dreadful sound coming from the woods outside. It sounded like a man screaming, a deer howling in pain, and the low growl of a bear, all at once. It was the scariest thing I've ever heard in my life. I checked all the doors and ran to the second story of the house to hide. I'm not sure why I felt so much fear, since I heard nothing after that, but I called a relative, and they told me I was just hearing things. That night, I could barely sleep. I was afraid of whatever this thing was going to come inside. I kept seeing things in the shadows of the trees after this incident. It was hard to ignore. Eventually, I went to live with my mother in the city. I was there for a better chance at a job. I also had some friends to reunite with there. Once I moved, I met up with my childhood best friend. She and I decided to take a long walk in the chilly temperatures of the night. We talked and talked. Nothing happened until about 11:30. We were crossing the street when I heard the same exact sound, but much louder, coming from the woods down the road. I was terrified. My friend, though, paid no attention to it. We continued walking, but I was a little more paranoid than before, just waiting for something to jump out after me. An hour passed and we had to split ways. She went home and I did too. I had some instrumental music playing on my phone to keep me calm. Obviously, that didn't last long. Of course, something had to happen in the dead of night while I was alone. As I walked in the streets, I heard a baby scream, but it didn't sound normal. It was a horrifying, distorted scream. I looked in the direction of the sound and thought I saw someone there. My feet moved faster than before, trying to get me home. Then I heard another scream, much scarier than the first. I ran for it. That might not have been the best decision, but it was instinctive. Suddenly, I heard feet hitting the pavement and felt like something or someone was chasing me. I looked back quickly and thought I saw a large black figure coming, but it only lasted several seconds till I saw nothing. The shouts and screams did not stop though. I finally got home, but I realized the door was locked and couldn't get inside. Unfortunately, those screams continued. After many calls and pressing the doorbell, my stepfather opened the door. I was a hyperventilating mess, but I got through it. I'm very spiritual and have been told by many mediums or spiritual leaders that I am a beacon for bad spirits. I assumed that it was a bad spirit, but I remember reading about Wendigos, a creature that is apparently connected to me in some ways that are unknown to me. I did research again and deeply believe that whatever followed me is still watching me. I'm not sure if it's a Wendigo, but it could be. Some acquaintances agree that it is quite possible. Now I'm just waiting for my next encounter with it, and I'm left wondering, what does it want, and what will it do next?
Before I start my story, I would like to say that I'm about 6 feet and 3 inches tall, and this took place during the middle of summer in 2015. I had recently landed a position in field sales, and I couldn't be more happy with it. The money is great, and the company I worked for even gave me a company vehicle. The only downside to the job is that my sales territory is quite expansive and could at times end up with me driving across several states, and the people I work for sometimes expect me to drive to most of my customers. I was grateful, however, since not that many people my age get these kinds of opportunities. After a couple of weeks of getting the hang of things, I had gotten a business call from a clinic in northwestern Florida that wanted me to come and provide a demonstration of our product. I told them that I'd be there by noon the next day. This drive would take me straight down the middle of Alabama on Interstate 65, and then bring me through Alabama State Route 113 down to Florida. I planned to get there by 11 p.m. the night before. Once I got past Montgomery, it was almost 9:30, so it was already dark. I have experience with driving long distances during the night, so the fact that it was night didn't really bother me. Once I saw the exit sign for Flomaton, I took the exit. I had just noticed that it was already 10 p.m., so I stopped at a gas station and bought myself an energy drink so that I would arrive at my destination on time. Once I had gotten back on the road, I realized this drive was going to bring me through the middle of nowhere. After about 25 minutes of driving past farms, fields, and small towns, I arrived at another small town, and I stopped at a McDonald's to stretch my legs. Once I got back onto the road and headed south, I noticed a sign. The sign read, "Farm Machinery and Deer Crossing." Crap, another long drive through the middle of nowhere. After about 10 minutes or so, I noticed that my car was running low on gas. After a couple of minutes, I was just praying that I wouldn't be stuck on a country highway in the middle of the night, because it didn't look like there was going to be a gas station anytime soon. As I was driving down the country highway, I tried to use as little gas as possible. Just when my car was about to completely run out of gas, I saw a small gas station barely a quarter mile away. I pulled up, and I noticed that this gas station was pretty run down, and there were no cars at all around it. When I started to think this place wasn't open, I found out that the fill-up tanks were. Once the car was filled up, I was looking at my phone when I heard a sudden but barely noticeable sound on top of the gas station roof. I then looked up, being really quiet to try and hear the sound again. Nothing. Everything was silent. Thinking it was probably nothing and I'm probably just tired from driving so long, I decided to just stop driving for the night and sleep in my car. I looked at my phone for a bit and then fell asleep. I was out for a good hour or so, but I woke up to the same noise again in the same place. This time, I went outside my car to investigate. That was a big mistake. I went to the road so that I could see the roof better, and when my eyes adjusted, I saw a huge, man-like figure crouching on the roof. "Hey, what are you doing up there?" I called out. The thing then suddenly stood up. It locked eyes with me, and then let out this huge, ear-piercing screech, which I remember clearly to this day. The next thing I remember, it jumped down, and I was amazed by how tall the thing was. Based by how tall I am, this thing seemed to be over 8 feet tall. It then ran inhumanly fast into the woods. I know after seeing this thing that this was no skunk ape, but something worse. I as well ran as fast as I could back to the car and got out of there as soon as possible. My heart was beating so fast it could have popped out of my chest at any moment. God knows what that thing could have done to me if I was still sleeping. Once I got to the nearest town, I got a hotel room and tried to calm myself down. I stayed awake all night and then drove down to where I needed to be. A couple of months after my encounter, I remember watching this TV show about mysterious creatures in America. I remember seeing this part about a mysterious creature that matched the description of what I saw that night. Honestly, I still have nightmares about what I saw. That experience has now made me scared of driving through country highways at night, and whenever I go to a gas station after it's gotten dark, I make sure there are at least 1 or 2 cars there already.
Well, to start this off, I grew up in the 1970s in a small town in North Carolina. Well, it was almost too small to be called a town with only a school and a couple of small shops. I'm guessing you can imagine how boring it would be to be a teenager there, and it would have been so if it wasn't for the woods. The neighborhood that I lived in was backed up to a big forest that spread out for about 3 miles. And it's where I spent most of my teenage years with my 2 best friends, Levi and Connor. They both were in my class at this time. We were all 15. Levi lived across the street. He was smart and kinda quiet, unlike Connor, who lived down at the bad side of the neighborhood. Connor was a troublemaker, always getting sent to the dean's office at least once a week. He was loud, obnoxious, and a natural leader, always finding something for us to do. Be it legal or not, when he was around, we were never bored. It was the beginning of the summer holidays, and Levi had called for me. We went down to get Connor, and he was messing around with his younger brother's scooter in the front yard. We asked him if he wanted to go into the woods, and he said yes. Now, just in case this may be necessary, Connor had almost black shaggy hair, the most beautiful eyes. One was a light blue while the other was a brownish color. He always wore scuffy red Converse shoes and a denim jacket, and of course, I just had the biggest crush on him. While Levi had style brown hair, brown eyes, and freckles and was considerably shorter than me. Then there was myself, a red-headed brown-eyed girl that had quite a lot of people scared of me due to me being hyper. I was always ready to go somewhere or do something, and I was always talking about something. Anyway, we made our way into the woods and started walking into a random direction. We did this for fun, just to see what happens. Usually, we would try to get lost to try to find our way back, which most of the time just led us to being late for dinner and getting sent to our beds early, or worse for worse, getting grounded. But we did it anyway. We were making our way along a deer trail that I didn't think we had ever been on before, when Connor found a pile of crap and, of course, dipped a stick into it and then tried to chase us with it. Levi and I, of course, freaked out and scattered. Neither of us wants to be smeared with crap. I ran off, and luckily for me, Connor followed Levi instead in the opposite direction. After a while of them not coming back, I began to think they had left me, and I was furious. I was walking down the way I had seen them run, when suddenly something stuck out the bush and grabbed me. I let out a surprised yelp, and Connor shushed me, only for me to shout to him, scaring me. Only when I saw the look on his face, I decided that I shouldn't be talking, and I shut my mouth. Connor whispered to me, "Got to say this," and began to lead me through the bushes, and further we went. The more and more we went, the more I could smell something disgusting. We came across something green. Levi started staring at the ground with a weird expression on his face. I was about to ask what was wrong, but Connor tugged me past him a few more feet, a wave to where there was this ditch, and in the ditch I could only describe as something out of a nightmare. It was a body. It was a purple-blue color. It almost looked swollen. The stench was so terrible I had to cover my mouth with my jumper so as not to gag. I backed up to where Levi was. Connor stood looking into the trench for about 5 more seconds before he walked back over to us. "Cool, huh?" he said with a grin. Levi gave him a disgusting look before saying, "No, it ain't cool. We need to go home and call the police." "What? Why?" What do you mean, why? There's a body dumped in the woods, Connor. It's clearly been murdered." "No, man, it's so cool. We cannot get the police. If we do, they're gonna take this away and think we were the killers." "Why would they think it was us?" "Because that's what the police do, man." "Don't be stupid, Connor. You can't stop me." "Fuck's sake, man. If you get the police out here, this will just be on the news, and we'll get questioned by everybody. They'll probably set out a curfew. They'll ban us from going into the forest. There'll be police everywhere. And then, you know what? Summer will freaking suck." I had just been quietly watching the argument take place, not really caring about what happened. But that got me, and there was no way in how I was going to let my summer get ruined. Connor's right. What? You're not serious. "Levi, we have the whole summer left to do whatever we want. Do you really want to spend it inside with a curfew?" "Yeah, man, 2 against 1. Come on, you can't do anything stupid." Levi looked crushed. "Fine, but I'm not coming near this again." Connor had let out a whoop of joy, and we had made our way home listening to him talk about how cool it would be and how this would be our secret. Well, the secret didn't last very long, as by the end of the week Connor had shown all the rest of our friends, and it was a miracle that nobody did call the police. But I guess that just goes to show how close everybody was. We were like one big family, and almost like all families, we had our secrets. The body remained there for the rest of the summer. I only went up a few more times, and I'd gotten less interesting. As each time we went, there were only bones left. Anyway, on the last week of summer vacation, we decided to have a big camp out with all of our friends. There was me, Levi, Connor, Josh, and Walsh. He was a loud-mouthed boy with mousy hair and blue eyes. Alice was there as well. She was a quiet girl with straight brown hair. Courtney was there, who I could only describe as the only girl I actually saw as a friend, probably because she was the only one who put thought into things and didn't have a bratty attitude. And then there was Kenny, the kid whose garden we were camping in. He had sandy blonde hair, brown eyes, freckles. His dad owned the biggest garden, so of course we could camp there. And as an added bonus, Kenny's garden backed right up into the woods. And even though we had promised Kenny's mom that we wouldn't go into the woods after dark, we were definitely planning to. But unfortunately, our plans were foiled by a good old Mother Nature, as she decided to make it rain. So all 7 of us piled into this big tent, which belonged to Courtney. We played cards for about 2 hours, making up new games with crazy rules. Joss even suggested that we play strip poker, only to have a shoe chucked at him and to be told that if he carried on acting like a pedo, we would send him home. He quieted down after that, and we carried on playing until Kenny began complaining that we were going to run out of oxygen. This went on for a good 10 minutes before he decided to unzip the tent and stick out his head so he could breathe. "Hey guys, the rain stopped," said Kenny excitedly. "Seriously?" I said. "Yeah, let's go do something." We then all argued for a good 20 minutes about where we were going to go and what we were going to do, And so far, breaking into school and hanging out there was winning until Connor said, "Why don't we go see the body?" That was it. Everyone put on their shoes and coats, and Kenny took down his dollar store flashlight that he had hung from the roof of Courtney's tent, and off we went. Connor and Kenny led the way, but Kenny's flashlight, to be honest, was pretty crap and didn't light anything very well. And I don't believe that we needed anyway, because even though I hadn't been to the body in weeks, it was burned into my mind how to get there. The whole way there we were talking about what it was looked like now and how creepy this all was, and then the conversation took a turn that it never had before. We began talking about who we thought the body was and why they were dead and who had murdered them, and this scared me because it made me see it for what it really was, a dead body of a murdered person hidden by someone in the woods, and we had never reported it. I brought this issue up to Connor, who simply stated, "It's too late now, there's probably only bones left, and even if we did tell the police, we would get in trouble for hoarding off for so long." To this, I remained silent and kept walking alongside Courtney and Levi, listening to Josh telling Alice some bullshit story behind us. They soon went silent though. As we came to the ditch, Connor and Kenny stood silently at the edge, sharing the flashlight into it, Kenny's mouth agape at horror. I asked what it was, and Connor shushed me and beckoned me and the rest of us over with his finger. As I came up to the edge, what I saw had freaked me out. In that ditch was something piled on top of the original body. It was wrapped in a yellow floor pattern bedsheet, and it was tied with some sort of string at the top to make it not slip off. Everyone stood silent for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was probably only a couple of seconds before Connor pulled his Stanley knife out of his pocket and descended into the ditch. Levi began to protest, but Connor turned and shushed him and whispered to Kenny to shine his light on him, to which Kenny obeyed Connor, then cut some of the string and poured to the seat to reveal the face of a young girl. She stared up at us with a dead glaze over her eyes and a blank expression. I felt like I was going to be sick, and apparently so did Levi, as he began to violently retch, and he turned away. I couldn't turn away no matter how hard I tried. I was mesmerized. Connor suddenly jumped back, with a look of sudden realization and horror across his pale face as he began to scramble up the side of the ditch. Josh helped him up, and a chorus of "what happened and what was it" began, only to have him frantically shush us. With a shaking voice he said, "It's dry as bone." A feeling of absolute dread settled in my stomach. If you don't get what the big deal was, it had rained only an hour earlier, and everything was wet. This body was dry, which means that it had been put here recently. Everyone was silent. Then there was a noise behind us across the ditch, and my heart was in my throat. As we turned around, and Kenny quickly pointed his flashlight at where the noise was coming from, then, click. Suddenly from across the ditch came an extremely bright light, illuminating us and making the person holding the light impossible to see. "Run!" yelled Connor, grabbing me by the arm, and everyone sprinted, and whoever it was with the light sprinted to where we were. They were running violently, randomly illuminating trees and brushes that scared the shit out of some deer. And then suddenly, it went off. I felt my heart stop, and Connor was muttering, "Shit, shit, shit, where the heck is he?" under his breath as we ran for our lives. I tried listening to hear if a guy was still coming after us, but everything was so blurry I just couldn't keep track of who was doing what and where the noises were. Levi stumbled, and a couple of seconds later, face streaked with tears of fear, followed by Josh. We huddled together, and everyone began blabbering out what the heck was going on, and who was that, and what do we do if he finds us. But then Courtney spoke up. "Where's Alice?" Everyone was silent and looked towards the woods in fear until Levi spoke up. "Kenny, go get your dad." Connor looked over to glare at Levi before turning to Kenny and barking, "No. Kenny, no, get your dad. Let's think about this, okay?" What do you mean, let's think about this? He will call the police, and don't you think the police are gonna believe us? I don't think so. This arguing went on for probably 5 more minutes, until eventually, everybody shushed up, Kenny begins pounding on his back door, and this goes on for about 5 minutes before Mr. Stokes opens the new door with a red face. "What are you guys doing? What are you playing, boys? 2 in the goddamn morning," he hollered. "Dad, Alice is in the woods." "What? She ran in when we were playing tag and she hasn't come back out. We think she got lost." Mr. Stokes stared off into the woods for a bit, squinting, trying to see beyond the tree line before muttering an okay and repeating into the house, to only 5 minutes return with a big flashlight. He stomped off into the woods and we all waited for about 20 minutes before he returned and said, "Fun's home, kids. Go home, get your fathers and tell them to bring flashlights." And that was it. We all went home, told our parents what was going on, and the men went out to the woods to look for Alice. While the woman stood around in Kenny's backyard, we were all told to stay at home, to which I didn't. I crossed the street and knocked on Levi's door. He answered it and I stepped inside, and apparently Connor had the same idea, as he was sitting on the sofa in Levi's room, eating some chips. "Do you think they'll find her?" I asked quietly. "Yeah, she's probably just panicked and got herself lost," said Connor. "And what if he got her? What if she's dead? What are we gonna do then?" said Levi, as he stood by the window looking into the dark street. Suddenly, the sound of police sirens cut through the air. "Oh no," mumbled Levi as the police cars drove down the road to Kenny's house. We watched as 2 police cars pulled up and the men came out carrying big flashlights. They walked around the back into the woods. After that, I and Kenny went home. I watched out my window as suddenly 5 more police cars appeared at my parents' house. It was around 6 in the morning at this point. I asked my mother what had happened, and she told me that they found a body in the woods and that it wasn't looking good. The next day, the police interviewed all of us. We all stuck to Connor's story. They didn't find Alice, and just like he said, it would be there as news coverage. A ban on us was going into the woods, and there was a curfew for 9 p.m. When we went back to school, there was an assembly of safety for strangers. They found Alice in the end 12 days later, chopped up into little pieces and crammed into a garbage can on the side of the road about 10 miles from her house. I have my own kids now, and since I've lost contact with all my childhood friends apart from Levi, who I now have a child to, and he recently told me that Kenny had been killed due to an overdose, we were invited to a funeral along with the rest of the kids I grew up with. I will not be attending that funeral.
This happened a few years ago when I was new to the Army. I'd finished basic training and was done with my job training as well, when I got 2 separate orders from the Army that were soon after canceled, leaving me stuck waiting for orders again. One day, while hoping orders would come in, the training platoon sergeant came in and called mine and another guy's name. Sergeant asked if we had our berets, ID cards, and wallets. We said yes, at which point we were told to report to the staff duty van. Once we arrived, another sergeant told us we were going to be battle buddies for a soldier they were picking up from a hospital. We got in and started driving. Initially, we thought we were going to the base hospital until we turned and headed for the front gate. Okay, I thought. We were likely going to the hospital in town instead. Then, at the front gate, we turned, heading out of town instead of into town. Finally, the sergeant pointed to a gas station and turned back to us. The sergeant then informed us we were going to pick up a soldier in Phoenix. The sergeant then told us, if you need a snack, a drink, or to use a latrine, do so now, or forever hold your peace. 10 minutes later, we were back on the road again. When we finally arrived in Phoenix, we went looking for the particular clinic at the hospital. We went around the campus twice before finally finding the entrance. We were sent back to the van shortly after the guard inspected us for guns and objects sharp and blunt that could potentially be used as weapons. Shortly after this, we finally made it into the waiting area. There was a double door behind us with a former linebacker in hospital scrubs, and to the right of us was a waiting area with tables and vending machines. To the left was a door too small, but there was an office behind it with plexiglass, and straight ahead was a double door with electronic locks and signs that read no visitors beyond this point. The sergeant went to talk to people in the plexiglass office while we took seats at a table. After 5 minutes of arguing with the staff, they took the sergeant back to beyond the security doors. My buddy and I waited around for about 15 more minutes before hearing a commotion near the front entrance. Some cops were hauling in a thrashing man. One of the cops spotted us and asked us for help to hold the man down. We looked at one another before deciding to tackle the guy. I swear my buddy shouted, "Leroy Jenkins," before we tackled the man, holding him down. The man we tackled was thrashing and moaning about being so hungry and needing to eat. After what was likely a minute, but that felt more like hours, the staff came out and stuck the man with the needle that put him to sleep. Once he'd settled down, the staff strapped the man to a gurney. One of the cops went and talked to a lady on the staff while the other guys came over and spoke with us. The man on the gurney turned out to be a homeless man who'd been stalking around the neighborhood and attacking residents. They tased the man before arresting him, and it was clear he needed to be examined. We brought up the eat marks before one of the staff said 2 words that sent chills to the room. A Wendigo psychosis. The cop then said, "What?" The staff member then informed the cop that people go crazy and want to eat people. She then said, "Think of it as like those Ted Bundy serial killer types." Soon after that, everything settled down, and 15 minutes later, the sergeant returned with the privates at the security area. My buddy and I wondered if we'd have to wrestle this guy down too. All the private said was hi. Soon after that, we headed back to the base, and everything was quiet again. This happened to me when I was about 10 years old, and it still haunts me. This was around 1969 or 1970, and pop bottles was how us kids came up with money for candy or whatever. I would search everywhere for them. Construction sites for gold mines. I would regularly search abandoned properties. I was a little braver than my friends, so I would always have a little more money to show for my efforts. There was a large and creepy house by itself on the outside of our neighborhood in our small little town that was clearly abandoned. I never went in there. Something about it just felt different and a little scary, even to me. But having nothing to show for my pop bottle search, I decided to quickly check it out. I should have stuck with my instincts, but I ignored them and went in, which was a big mistake. The walls were painted an awful shade of green, even the ceilings, but the chilling thing was the mirrors. There must have been hundreds of them. They were literally everywhere. Many were in the floor broken, and you couldn't even walk through without stepping on pieces of them. They were of all sizes and shapes, hanging on wires or frames, or just stands or shelves, or just laying against the walls. You could see all around you, and every room you went. I never imagined something like this, and it blew my mind. I couldn't process what I was seeing because it horrified me. My heart started pounding and I felt dizzy. It was way too much, and I got out of there, and I didn't think my feet even touched the steps leaving the place. I sat by a tree for a long time and got myself together before going home. I was soaking wet from sweating and feeling very sick. I would never know who put those mirrors up or what they were afraid of, but that image has stayed with me my entire life. I even hate the shade of green when I see it. They had a house of mirrors at a fair, and just looking at it made me sick. Even at a department store that has a large display of backed by mirrors, I have to look away. My days of exploring abandoned places have come to an end. You never know what's going to be on inside. It might just give you a phobia you're stuck with for the rest of your life.
I once rented a room in a small house in Hartford, Connecticut. This house was actually quite nice, with hardwood floors and a stove that heated the entire house during winter. You walked up some flat, circular stone steps to access the front door, and the landlady had a pretty garden out front. The back of the house was a bit of a mess, and she had, as I soon discovered, a hoarding disorder. Although I could see her home was cluttered, I simply needed a place to stay. One entire room was blocked off because she had so much stuff in it. Still, the room I was renting was charming and the bed was comfortable. I shared it with her one child, who was still in school. The bathroom was large enough to share and there was a washer and dryer and Wi-Fi. Another person briefly rented the room downstairs before she bounced and checked out. I started having odd experiences in this house. It had an aura of stress to it. For instance, one night, I was alone in the house, as the landlady had gone to spend the weekend with her fiancé. It was cold enough that she put wood chips in the stove before leaving. I enjoyed watching the flickering in the darkness. The living room took on a calmer feeling, like the fire inside the stove began to stir. All of a sudden, I had the awful feeling that someone was standing next to me. Spooked, I went upstairs into my room and shut the door. The next weird experience came when I was doing laundry in her messy basement. By this time, I was growing tired of the incredible mess. She kept the living room tidy, but that was about it. I wandered around the dark room as the washer spun, then stopped in a kind of odd horror. Someone had sprayed painted the words "fuck" in blood on the back of the steps. Entirely chilled, I found my Bible and prayed over the words. I wondered if Satanists had lived in the house or witches at one point. I started to feel like I was living in the presence of evil. The room I was staying in grew colder, night after night, literally. I began to feel like I was suffocating and struggled to sleep. One night, I rolled over, sleepy and chilled, and looked at the digital alarm clock. It was around 4:20 a.m. I looked towards the window at the far end of the room, where she kept a round, mirrored coffee table. There was a dark mass there, with no face, just staring at me. I could see curly hair, but no distinct features. It was hovering, almost as if it was lying on his side. I screamed and turned all the light. I asked my landlady the next day if she had heard me screaming, but she denied it. I knew she had once been married to a man who evidently had abused her. When I spoke to her boyfriend, I decided to take a risk. I inquired about my landlady's husband, who is now deceased. Her fiancé told me that the neighbors had described him as evil. I hesitated when I asked if he had curly hair. He replied in the affirmative. I am convinced that I saw some sort of imprint of this person, manifested at a spiritual sensitivity, which I have possessed for most of my life. Later on, I saw a photo of his husband and the landlady's child. He indeed had dark curly hair.
I live in a small town where the school has roughly 150 kids, and that's kindergarten through 12th grade. And if that doesn't tell you how small my town is, nothing will. And of course, every small town has its own haunted house. And that house happened to be mine. My mom has always claimed that our house was haunted. She claimed to see shadows, hear voices, and footsteps in the hallway. But I was always a skeptical kid. Anyway, I was about 12 at the time. I was home alone waiting for my mom one night. She was to come home and take me to a church activity. It was 7 o'clock at night, and I was sitting on my couch with my dog at my feet, most likely sleeping. I had always been afraid of ghost movies and such, but that night made my fear of the paranormal activity much worse. The whole house seemed to be alive. The floors were randomly squeaking, walls moaning, and there was a terrible wind outside. I was terrified. I tried my best to just pay attention to what was on television, but all I could hear was my scared breathing. But suddenly, all at once, the squeaking and moaning stopped. It was dead silent, but out of the silence I could hear obvious, heavy footsteps coming from the hallway behind me. My sleeping dog instantly shot up and started barking and running around the house. Being a scared little 12-year-old, I curled up in a ball on my couch and screamed, "Please go away." And just like that, the footsteps stopped. Everything stopped. The squeaking, moaning, footsteps, all of it. Since then, I have never stayed home alone.